Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be diving right back into the Spawn Wild C.A.T.S team-up miniseries with Devil Day number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. Before we get started today, I'd like to point out that I have in fact been fighting a cold for the entirety of this week, and if my voice sounds a little bit different, that's why. First published in February of 1996, I would like to point out that I feel this cover has a far better and more cohesive layout than what we saw on the cover for issue number 1. That issue's cover just felt very haphazard and slapdash, as if all of the characters had been pulled from other images in other places and then put together digitally. I have no confirmation if that was indeed the case, but it sure felt that way when you looked at it. It just seemed as though the sizing of the characters wasn't thematically matching in any way, I guess would be the best way to put it. They just seemed like they were pulled from other media, whereas this very clearly feels like a cover that was designed specifically for this issue and therefore has a better overall layout. And it's a pretty decent cover, what with Spawn being front and center up here in the foreground and the rest of the Wildcats team fighting against some demons. And these are demons that we have come across before, though you would be forgiven for not realizing that if you didn't know who they were already. On the inside of the front cover, we do not get the credits. We instead get an ad, and I am not a fan of comic book companies doing this. I would much prefer that the credits be listed on the front inside cover, but apparently they decided not to do this, which I find even more surprising given that the ad in question is for another Wildstorm property, that being the Wildstorm collectible card game. Jim Lee could have put this anywhere. He owns this collectible card game. He owns Wildstorm. This could have appeared anywhere in the book, and he instead chose to put it on the inside front cover rather than giving the credits for the people that were responsible for making this book. And it just feels a little bit, I don't know, scummy in a way. I know that's probably being harsh, but I would much prefer that the people who deserve credit for the creation of this book have their names listed right here on the inside cover instead of an ad for a collectible card game that I have never in my life come across in all of my searching through comic book stores and conventions, and I've never once in my life encountered anyone that talked about ever playing this game. But if you have, feel free to talk about it in the comments below. I'd like to know more about it. Getting back into the story, it picks up exactly where we left off, where our heroes are now teleported to the future world of New York City 2015 and are trying to come to grips with exactly what they're seeing. Keep in mind, the only two characters who are from this time are the new zealot and the old grifter. They are not dumbfounded in any way because they left this timeline, but we see here that Voodoo and Spartan are trying to come to grips with this, as is Void, who states that, the other characters are like, my God, how did this happen? What God would let this happen? And we see that Void tells them that she was raised to believe that there was no God and believes that, in fact, something else did this. However, God and Satan do exist in this universe, and unfortunately for all of them, one of Satan's minions, aka Spawn, has taken over the world as the Ipsissimus, which is still a dumbfoundingly ridiculous name in my opinion. And even Spawn is having a hard time coming to grips with this, as he states, is this really what's going to happen? What I'm going to become? What I'm going to do in the future? He's like, I just can't believe that I would ever go down that path and just turn the world into this hellscape. But we see that New Zealot tells him, oh no, for sure, this is you. As you can see clearly, that's your banner. And we see that the flag that is hanging up in the distance bears Spawn's image, and he is now left to face the consequences of the actions that he will one day commit. At this point, Maul interjects and asks exactly what their next move should be. New Zealot informs him that the plan is to get to their new headquarters, seeing as how the Halo building was destroyed in the siege of 2005, and they've had to uproot to a brand new location. However, Old Grifter informs them that this new location is on the opposite side of town, and getting there in one piece is going to be no small task. At this point, however, Spawn interjects, and we can see that he still doesn't fully trust these new quote-unquote teammates, and this is understandable given that New Zealot and Old Grifter did try to assassinate him not 24 hours before this. He asks New Zealot how he can be sure that their teammates are not going to attack him and try and finish the job that she failed at. However, she takes offense to this and turns around stating, "I told you, that's no longer the plan now that I've decided to back out. And now we're going to try and have a full assault on the Abscissimus with your help." However, she turns around and is dumbfounded when she sees that there is a very ugly and unfortunately dangerous blockade standing between them and their new hideout. Also, I'd like to point out this wanted poster for Backlash that's on the wall. I think that's a cool little touch, though I would point out that at this point in 2015, Backlash would be in his 60s, so despite still being alive and even having superpowers, I do wonder how much of a threat he truly poses to the Abscissimus if he were in fact to try and attack. We then see that our hero's path is blocked by none other than the Flebiax or Flebiax. I still to this day don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that word. Notably, the Vindicator and the Vaporizer. Spawn notes that he realizes that they're connected to the Violator in some way, and upon hearing this, New Zealot states, "You mean Commissioner Violator?" She says, yes, this is in fact the Flebiax or Flebiax, however you're supposed to say it, and that they're nearly unkillable. However, she is then immediately scolded by Old Zealot, who tells her that nothing is unkillable and that she needs to start thinking like a Coda. Now, there are some interesting things that are going on here. Number one, the Violator is apparently the police commissioner in this new hellscape world, and also both the Vindicator and the Vaporizer are drawn completely different by Scott Clark. He makes no attempt to even try to represent them in the way that we've seen them depicted in both the Violator and Violator vs. Badrock miniseries, which I find odd given that they had established looks at this point, and for him to just kind of draw them as discount Violators, in my opinion, does a bit of disservice to the characters. It just seems to me like maybe Todd should have given Scott a little bit more direction about this, especially given the reference material that already existed. If you don't know what I'm talking about at this point, feel free to check out both the Violator and Violator vs. Badrock miniseries. You can find them in my Spawn miniseries playlist. These characters had very distinct looks, and it's almost impossible to tell the two of them apart in this issue, which is really kind of disappointing in my opinion. I liked the looks that they were given in the two previous miniseries that they appeared in, and I kind of would have liked to see them continue on with that look. We then get an advertisement for the Backlash vs. Stormwatch Round 2 crossover event that happens in Backlash number 18. Now, as I'm recording this video, I have yet to reach the point where Backlash kind of goes off into his own solo series from the beginnings that he had in Stormwatch. If you'd like to know more about all of that, you can check out the origin of Backlash with the Team 7 miniseries in my Team 7 miniseries playlist, which not only gives Backlash's origin, but also Grifters and several other Wildstorm characters that you'll be very familiar with. And if you'd like to see where he started with Stormwatch and how he was able to break away from Stormwatch, you can check out my Stormwatch playlist and get all of that information. However, we then see that both Vindicator and Vaporizer are rather confused as they state, wait a minute, some of the cats that we've already killed are here, and so is the boss and his pet giant. However, before this conversation can go any further, our heroes decide to press their attack as they lunge forward, and Warblade even exclaims he's actually kind of relieved at the fact that these beings are nearly unkillable, because it allows him to really cut loose. We then see Grifter plant a shot right between the eyes of one of the Flebiacs, or Flebiacs, and then Warblade starts to question what they were talking about as he asks, what do they mean they've already killed some of us? However, Old Zealot tells him to not pay attention to their words as they're nothing but madness, and then commands that Young Zealot prove she is indeed a Coda by reciting the 14th precept. Young Zealot exclaims that which cannot be killed must be immobilized as she and Old Zealot both slice the hamstrings of the Vindicator, who immediately loses his balance and falls to the ground, and we then see Old Zealot ask Grifter how Maul is doing with the other one. Grifter exclaims, well, he's doing rather well. Unfortunately, he had to get really big to do it, and I'm afraid he might be losing it, as we see that Maul has increased his size exponentially, which means that mentally, he is decreasing his abilities by quite a large margin as he takes the fight to the Vaporizer. We then see that Maul is indeed starting to completely go berserk as he just beats the Vaporizer to a pulp. And at this point, Spawn does something rather out of character as he makes a quippy one-liner stating the last time he saw something that big and stupid, it was a game show audience, which to me is not good writing for Spawn. At no point has he ever been depicted as like a quippy one-liner type of character. And I really think that this line should have been given to one of the Wildcats characters, but that's just me, and at this point, it's been done, so there's no changing it now. We also see that Spartan flies Voodoo up to the shoulder of Maul to try and calm him down. She immediately starts to comfort him and talk him down off the ledge, getting him to shrink down in size so that he can slowly regain control of his rage. It also gives us a really good depiction of exactly how big he got, as we see that Voodoo looks to be roughly the size of a gerbil on his shoulder, meaning he got absolutely massive to fight the Vaporizer. Meanwhile, Grifter decides that the Vindicator still poses somewhat of a threat, so he grabs a nearby piece of lumber and stabs it through his forehead, pinning him to the ground, stating he won't be able to follow us now. As we see all of our heroes start to casually walk away, the two Flebiacs then are rather angry and state, wait, you can't do this to us. This is a serious offense. You're interfering with our duties. You never saw anyone do this to Starsky and Hutch and Columbo. And then suddenly, Vaporizer states, wait a minute, you're right. We did never see that. Why is that? Once again, trying to convey the goofiness of these two characters, which we don't really get too well of a look at in this issue, but if you'd like to see more of what I'm talking about, again, check out the miniseries of both the Violator and the Violator vs. Badrock in my Spawn miniseries playlist to get a much better idea of exactly what kind of personalities these two demons have. As our heroes continue to make our way through the city, Young Zealot states, we finally put some distance between us and those two bloodsuckers. And Spawn states, well, I'm glad to hear it because I'm really having a hard time dealing with this whole one nation under Spawn thing. Old Grifter states, yeah, well, how do you think we feel? We have to deal with this in our daily lives. And once again, you're calling yourself the Ipsissimus these days for what it's worth. As they continue on their journey, Spawn tries to figure out how any of this was even possible, as he states, certainly this level of devastation would have drained all of my powers. However, he's quickly corrected by Old Grifter, who tells him, not since you defeated that devil god that you were enthralled to. The Ipsissimus has no power limits. This intrigues Warblade, who asks, wait a minute, are you really enthralled to a devil god? Spawn starts to explain that yes, he is, but not willingly, and that the devil god's name is Mabalja, but, however, at this point, their conversation is interrupted by a couple of shuriken that whiz by their heads. This infuriates Warblade, who asks, what wannabe ninja just threw those? However, he is immediately answered when a shadowy figure from the rooftop states, I am, and there's nothing you're going to do about it. You're on razor turf now, and if you want to keep your heads, you better get in line. However, he's immediately called off by their leader, who states, I recognize them, they're friends. I can tell by their scents. I can see that, or smell rather, that Tapestry, Young Zealot, and Grifter, wait a minute, there's two Grifters. He's then grabbed from behind by one of his subordinates who states, be careful, Capo, you're right by the fire escape. As he makes his way down the stairs, Young Grifter states, wait a minute, Santini, is that you? And Santini responds stating, well, of course it's me, but wait a minute, your voice sounds weird, you sound much younger. And then he realizes this has to do with Tapestry's time jump. Grifter walks up and states, yeah, I'm the 96 model, but what happened to you and the Black Razors? Santini tells him, Grifter, these are the Black Razors. I know they're all kids, but I've trained them rather well, or at least as well as I can, and they're all really here to help. But Grifter presses on, but what of all the rest of your old teammates? What happened to them? And Santini immediately stops him, stating, Cole, put it out of your mind. You don't need the imagery of that in your head. We need to just move on. Which speaks to the rather grim end that the Black Razor assault team most likely faced in the Siege of 05. Santini then decides to lead the group to the new Wildcats headquarters as he orders a few of his Razors to stand guard and cover their rear and alert them if any hot and heavy action starts to come this way. As he leads the team forward, he says, well, I guess the assassination attempt failed, so this is your plan B to bring the past Wildcats into the future and assault the Ipsissimus's fortress. He then states that, I guess this is our best chance to free the world and help Jacob and the others. Upon hearing this, though, young Grifter states, really, you're going to help Marlowe? Things really have changed, haven't they been? And Santini tells him, yeah, a lot of things have changed. All things change with time. People say that time is a healer, but I'm here to tell you it's a killer. Please, just keep following. And we get the sense that Santini really longs for the days when he and Marlowe were at each other's throats and that the world was still within reason and not the horrible hellscape that it is in the futuristic year of 2015. We then get an advertisement for the Fire from Heaven crossover event that happened across the entirety of Wildstorm Comics. And I don't have all of the issues necessary to do this with because it requires issues 1 through 3 of Sigma, and I have no issues of Sigma. And past that, it requires a total of 20 issues that had to be purchased over the course of 3 months in 1996, which, come on, Jim, that's just crazy. Expecting people to buy 20 issues of your comics over the course of 3 months is really asking a lot to get the entirety of this crossover event storyline. And I'm not saying that DC and Marvel haven't done the same or worse in their time running, but you know, man, in 1996, you were asking people to lay down a lot of cash on a lot of different books just to get the full run of a crossover event that you really could have spread out across more time than just 3 months to maybe not put such a hurt on people's wallets, especially in the month of May, where we can see they had to buy something like 10 comics just in May. Oh, I'm sorry, no, 9 comics just in the month of May alone. But still, man, 9 comic books all in 1 month? That's a lot to ask of people. And, you know, maybe they're not invested in the entirety of the Wildstorm universe. So you're really just kind of trying to force their hand into buying titles that maybe they don't normally buy. I really didn't like some of the financial choices that Jim Lee was making back in these days. And this is one of them for sure. This just seems like a really, you know, dirtball way of doing business and a way to just try and milk your customers for money. As they turn the corner and enter a control room, Santini says, well, Tapestry, your time team is back and they brought some visitors. Immediately, young Zealot begins to apologize, stating that she failed in her mission to eliminate the Ipsissimus, but she brought back reinforcements. We then see old Grifter state that this is Wildcats 2025, welcome everybody, as we see that the one they call Tapestry is in fact Zealot in the future. Now, because of this, and there being 3 separate Zealots in this story, I'm still going to refer to this Zealot as young Zealot, the Zealot from 96 as old Zealot, and the oldest of all the Zealots from 2015 as Tapestry for my own sanity and convenience. She states, well, you'll have to excuse me if I don't stand up, as we see she is now confined to a wheelchair. Old Zealot immediately rushes to her side and asks how she became Tapestry. Tapestry explains that the original Tapestry went mad and has been in a vegetative state for years, and then tells them that she took over the role when she was sidelined as an assassin due to injury in 05. However, she states that she fared better than others as she turns and points to Spartan, aka Hadrian's head, floating in an orb. Spartan from 96 walks up to Hadrian and states, my God, how did this happen? You must be down to your last body. And Hadrian then says, "Take it from me, Hadrian, the 10th and last Spartan, watch your butt." He then starts to mock old Grifter and states, "What happened, Cash? Too old for the job? You were supposed to bring back the head of the Ipsissimus." However, young Zealot quickly interjects, stating, "I was the one who failed in duties, not Cole. He was going to finish off the job, but I just couldn't bring myself to kill someone who hadn't technically done anything wrong yet." But she states that they brought back the young Ipsissimus with them and introduces everyone to Spawn. But Tapestry still isn't certain that Spawn can be trusted, and she asks him point blank, "Have you really come here to aid us in fighting your future self?" Spawn says that he's willing to help in any way he can, but he believes that they have more than enough people to handle the job of taking care of the Ipsissimus. However, Tapestry quickly corrects him and states that if they want to have any hope of their plan succeeding, that they're going to need way more people than who's just in this room. However, she states that they do have other people who are loyal to their cause, bringing up Delphi and the Sisters of Dakota, who have yet to be killed by the Ipsissimus. She also brings up the ruler of Hong Kong, who is in fact Heartless John and the Blood Queen, have already dedicated much of their most fearsome vampire triad to the cause. Santini then interjects, stating that he has 8 Black Razor assault teams around the city who are all awaiting their orders. And at this point, Voodoo starts to look around and asks, "But wait a minute, aren't there more Wildcats? I don't see any future versions of myself or Warblade or Void or Maul." And Old Grifter states, "Well, they're not here right now, and that's kind of hard to explain." However, at this point, they are all interrupted when an alarm sounds and Void looks over to notice that there's an incoming transmission. Santini immediately responds and asks what's happening when one of his subordinates explains to him that they're under attack by the Troika, and he has already taken out one of their units, and she's afraid that they won't be able to hold their position for long as the transmission is immediately cut off. Fearing the worst, Santini swears, and young Grifter asks, "Wait a minute, she said he when she was referring to the Troika. Aren't they more than one person?" And Tapestry explains to him, yes, they were, but when they pledged their allegiance to the Ipsissimus, he decided it would be amusing to make a few alterations, as you're about to find out. We then see that Maul is rather concerned as there's a large rumbling and a lot of debris falling from the ceiling. Interestingly enough, it is cool to see that they brought up Heartless John, aka Santini, from the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries, showing that he not only went to Hong Kong like he stated, but he also took it over like he stated, and is now the ruler of Hong Kong, and that he eventually married the Blood Queen from Wetworks, and that together they are now in control of the Vampire Triad, which is really cool. Now, if you'd like to know more about what I'm talking about, you can check out my videos on the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries in my Spawn miniseries playlist, and also Wetworks issues in my Wetworks playlist. They'll provide a little bit more backstory to these characters and exactly what I'm talking about here. At this point, however, Troika explodes into the room, and Grifter is shocked to see that they have indeed been fused into one individual creature. Now, they started out as a team of 3, and if you'd like to see that, their first appearance can be found in my Wildcats playlist. However, Troika is also shocked when they look around and see that they are seeing a lot more Wildcats than should be here, as they thought most of the Wildcats team had been eliminated, but now there's suddenly more than ever. They also note that there's more than one Grifter, and speaking of the 2 Grifters, they waste no time in immediately opening fire, while Tapestry, thinking on her feet, so to say, no pun intended, turns to Void and tells her to teleport them all to a specific location 1 mile due south of where they are currently. Void says that she'll try, and Troika are surprised when they see her bring up her teleportation field and get them all out of here, as they even state, wait a minute, that's Void, she's the only one who has that capability, but she was employed by someone else the last time we saw her. We then get an advertisement for Wildstorm.com. Now keep in mind that the world of 1996 was quite different from what it is today in 2026 as I'm recording this video, and that 1996 was the year that a large portion of American households got access to the internet for the very first time. So advertising that you had a website was actually a pretty big deal, as was including the entire web address, which included the http://www. Portion of your web address, because again, people weren't super familiar with how to use the internet at this point, and they also weren't exactly well versed in using the limited search engines of the time either. So you wanted to make sure that you let them know your entire web address so that they could go directly to your website from their homepage. We then get an advertisement for the European tour of Wildstorm that was happening in 1996. Obviously, they're trying to dial up the sex appeal here with all of the scantily clad female characters on the page. But I am interested, if you were one of the people that happened to go and see this Wildstorm tour in Europe, talk about it in the comments below. I'd like to know what it was about, what it entailed, what they were doing. And seeing as how I've never been to Europe and definitely didn't live there in the 90s, I don't have any knowledge about how this tour went at all. The team then suddenly appears in an underground cavern that Tapestry tells them should shield them from the scanners of the Abscissimus. Spawn asks if this is some kind of safe house, and Tapestry confirms that it is. She tells him it's also where they keep their dearest treasures, and it puts them within striking distance of the Abscissimus' stronghold. However, young Zealot then notices that both Warblade and Voodoo are headed towards the Memorial Cavern, and Old Grifter tries to stop them. However, he is too late, and the two of them suddenly look up and see memorials built in their honor and realize that they are both dead in this future world of 2015. Old Grifter apologizes and tells them that he just didn't know how he could bring himself to let them know that they had died. And Warblade is understandably rather upset as he states, "How could you hide this from us? You know, we're both dead. What happened?" Young Zealot tells him that he can't put it all on Cole, as he went back into the Halo building during the siege to try and save them, but he just couldn't make his way through the flames to save their lives. We then see an advertisement for Netcom Internet Service Provider. This would have been a competitor to things like AOL or MSN. And for those of you who are younger and may not know any of this, the internet of 1996 was a far different place. It was all done through the phone lines, and you had to subscribe to an ISP, and you were limited in the number of hours you could be on. It was based on how much you paid. This service was providing 40 hours of primetime use and unlimited non-primetime hour use for the low price of $19.99 a month. Or is it? Oh, $19.95 a month. Excuse me. I was 4 cents off. Listen, if you weren't there, it was way more headache to use the internet back in 96 than it is today. And we are definitely living in a world where we are reaping the benefits of the technology that we have at hand, but with fiber optic cables and high-speed download times. And man, I am so happy that we do not still have the internet of 1996, because it really kind of sucked. Also, you had to get a CD-ROM to download all of the stuff that you needed to even access the internet and get your ISP running. It was a whole thing, man. Just be happy we don't have to do this anymore. Getting back to the story, we see that Tapestry also reiterates the things that young Zealot told them, as she states that they all tried to help save the lives of both Voodoo and Warblade, but that the inferno of the Halo building was just too much and they weren't able to help save their friends. And that in the 10 years that have happened since then, they've lamented their failure every single day. Maul then interjects and states, "Yeah, well, that's real touching, but what else have you been hiding? You know, am I still alive? How about Void? How about Marlowe?" And Tapestry says, "Yes, you're all still alive, but please, I'd rather not say any more than that." Spawn then looks a little grim as he states, "You know, a tomb like this is all too familiar to someone like me, and I really hate the fact that I've had a hand in creating it." Old Grifter says, "Well, the devil made you do it," and the, I guess, old Spartan tells him that that's the whole reason that they tried to assassinate him in the past, but it really was kind of a childish dream, the whole idea that we could make it never happen. and that perhaps this is really the better way to go about things in trying to change this future instead of prevent it from ever happening in the first place, as he tells them to all move along, that they need to continue on their quest towards the Abscissimus' stronghold. As the team finally makes its way to the surface, Old Zealot asks if they are near the fortress of their enemy. Santini answers and states that they are, and that the Abscissimus has commandeered the Chrysler Building as his palace. That ever since the Battle of Pennsylvania Avenue, when the original Youngblood fell in 2004 trying to defend the White House, that the Chrysler Building has become the official seat of America's government. It's now called the Red House, which in my opinion is a dumb name. Maul then asks, though, what else can we expect to see here in terms of defenses? We've already encountered Troika and a few of the Flebiac brothers. What else is there? Tapestry answers that it's hard to say, but as long as they remain focused and together, they should be able to handle whatever comes their way. At this point, however, we see that Voodoo is starting to doubt their chances as she looks at the Chrysler Building and sees that it looks different. Warblade asks her if she's scared, and she says that she doesn't know, that if they're going to die in 2005 at the Halo Building, it means they can't be killed here, apparently, but maybe time is different now, and that everything feels wrong ever since she had her vision of the amulet. Spawn then looks up ahead and says, "My God, is that the Chrysler Building? What happened to it?" And he's answered by Old Grifter, who states, "Pretty, isn't it? Yeah, that's the Red House, the arbiter of where they dismembered love and slaughtered kindness. Welcome to the party, kids." We then get a look at some upcoming Wildstorm books, including DEFCON 4, the Gen 13 Ordinary Heroes miniseries, Union, and Wildcats. Obviously, this is a Wildstorm published book, so it makes sense that they would have this blurb, but it's not really that important to go through. And as we reach the final page of this issue, we see Grifter look up at the Chrysler Building and say, "The abyss is waiting," as we see that the next issue is going to be called The Devil You Know. I have a real problem with this final page because, as I stated before, given that this is supposed to be literal hell on earth, New York City sure as heck doesn't look that bad. And given what Spawn's reaction was at seeing the Chrysler Building, it seems to me that there should have been a lot more going on here than just a glowing Spawn symbol, a skull, and some chains. This should have looked way worse. There should be fire and brimstone and demons all over the place. And instead, all we get is a little bit of decoration on the side of the Chrysler Building and some smoke plumes. Come on, man. Scott Clark seems to be really kind of phoning it in on what hell on earth should look like. To me, New York City should look so much worse than this, and it just looks like, mostly the same, except for a few fires burning and a big glowing spot on the side of the Chrysler Building. This does not scream hell on earth to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it should look a lot worse than this. We then reach the letter section, which is kind of an odd inclusion for a miniseries in my opinion, but they decided to roll with it. They also printed up some reader-submitted artwork, which is kind of cool. I like that. Most of these letters are not really that interesting, but there was one that really did catch my eye, where a reader asked exactly how this miniseries ties in to the ongoing Wildcats series, as it seems to not make a whole lot of sense in where that particular comic book was at this point. Now, the response he gets is that this is supposed to take place right before Wildcats number 15. That being said, in my ongoing retrospective of Wildcats, I have not made it anywhere close to Wildcats number 15 just yet, as of recording this video anyway. But if you'd like to check out the videos I have made so far, you can find them all in my Wildcats playlist. And as we reach the end of the book, we finally get to see the credits. Writer, Alan Moore. Penciler, Scott Clark. Inker, Sal Regala. Or Regla? Regla. Sorry about that. Letterer, Tom Orzechowski. Colorist, Leanne Clark. Again, I still believe that these credits should be up on the inside of the front cover, but I'm not the one who printed this book. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Wildcats animated series, which at this point was in syndication on the USA Network. This, of course, is because the animated series had already been canceled by, I believe, CBS is what it was originally airing on, and had been picked up by the USA Network and was airing Saturdays and Sundays at 11 and 10 a.m. respectively. And that was Spawn Wild C.A.T.S Devil Day number 2. Overall, I don't dislike this book. It's okay. I have a few issues with it. Number one, they really kind of telegraphed the whole idea of Voodoo and Warblade being dead in the future to the point where it doesn't even feel like any kind of like big reveal or plot twist or surprise, because the whole time, even in the first issue, you could see old Grifter and young Zealot kind of dodging any questions that Voodoo and Warblade had about their future selves. So it just kind of felt like a foregone conclusion when it actually happened. And as I already stated, this whole premise of quote unquote hellscape New York not really looking that bad compared to regular New York City, that really sticks with me. The whole motivation for every character in this story is that they are trying to prevent the worst case scenario of literal hell on earth and Spawn being the ruler of the country and, you know, this just nightmare existence that they're all experiencing. And to me, the artwork should reflect that exact nightmare scenario that they're all trying to change. Because when you just draw it as like standard New York City skyline with some smoke plumes and a Spawn symbol and maybe one building's kind of fallen over, it's not conveying that at all. It doesn't seem that bad. I mean, yes, they're all talking about the death and destruction, but we're not seeing any of it reflected in the artwork. So to me, it just doesn't really hit with any kind of like, you know, gravitas in any way. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinion may be that Scott Clark did fine with it and that the recollection of all the characters involved is more than enough to convey the terrible situation that they're in and the existence that they're trying to prevent. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.